Hello to all of our viewers across the world, and welcome back to another week of your Brain at Work Live. I'm your host, Shelby Wilburn. In this week's episode, we'll be exploring the widespread movement toward human capital efficiency impacting organizations worldwide with a special guest. Now, before we get into that, we're sending a big hello today to our audience, all of our registered Zoom participants, as well as our friends streaming across our social platforms. And regardless of what platform you're on, let us know in the comments section. Speaking of comments, just a quick reminder in Zoom to make sure that you select everyone or all panelists and attendees so that we can see them. So where are you all joining in from today? I'm going to check the chat as always. We have, okay, New York is here. Who else? Texas, nice. San Francisco, Florida, Canada, amazing. We'll let those come in. For our regulars, it's great to have you back. For those of you that are new to your Brain at Work Live, welcome to the party. For some context, it is a title of one of the best-selling books by our CEO and co-founder, Dr. David Rock, and it's also the name of our blog and podcast. We are recording today's session, so if you're interested in the replay, be on the lookout for an email later today. That email is going to include a survey for feedback, as well as a number of resources that are aligned to today's conversation. We also suggest putting your phone on Do Not Disturb and quitting out of your email and messaging apps. That's going to allow you to get the most out of today's discussion and also help with your audio and video quality. And we love interaction, so feel free to share your thoughts and comments with us in the chat. Now, as we get ready to kick off, settle in, grab some coffee and water, and we are going to introduce our speakers for today. So, our guest for today is currently leading the people team at 10x Genomics, whose mission is to master biology to advance human health. Prior to 10x Genomics, she was the VP of HR at Netflix, and before that, held a number of HR leadership positions globally. Driven by solving problems, influencing the whole system, and building deep collaborative relationships, she aims to help organizations attract the best talent and creates an environment where employees can thrive. She is a chartered occupational psychologist by the British Psychological Society and holds a master's and PhD in psychology. She has held several visiting lecture positions across the UK and Singapore, authored several academic papers, and the book, The Psychology of Creativity and Innovation in the Workplace. She's won a series of awards, including Top Talent Officers Awards in 2020, Advocate of the Year Award by Women in Finance in 2018, the Women Leadership Achievement Award in 2015, and shortlisted for Management Today's 35 Under 35 in 2014. Please join me in welcoming Chief People Officer at 10x Genomics, Dr. Bex Port. Thanks for being here today, Dr. Port.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Nice. And our moderator for today, no stranger here, an Aussie turned New Yorker who coined the term neuroleadership when he co-founded NLI over 2 decades ago. With a professional doctorate, 4 successful books under his name, and a multitude of bylines ranging from the Harvard Business Review to the New York Times and many more, a warm welcome for the co-founder and CEO of the Neuroleadership Institute, Dr. David Rock. David, it's great to have you back, and I'm passing it over to you.
Thanks very much, Shelby. Great to be back. And Bex, great to have a conversation with you about this. Great to see you again.
Yeah, likewise, David. Great to be here.
I have to tell you, tell folks listening kind of a little bit of the backstory, because it's been quite a journey. I was at a conference in February 2020, a particularly auspicious date, in Manhattan, in a room full of a lot of people. I remember some of them coughing a lot. It was, in hindsight, kind of a scary thing, but like a month later. But at the time, it was just a conference. And Bex, you appeared on stage and started telling the Netflix story about, at the time you were at Netflix, about the just the way they treat people as adults. And I was really taken to hearing firsthand, like, kind of how Netflix approached this. And I think, you know, many talent practitioners have sort of heard the stories about the practices, but to really hear up front kind of how they did it was fascinating. And we started to talk and followed up, and we ended up doing some work with you there at Netflix, and then, you know, stayed connected in your new role. But maybe just kind of give us a couple of minutes of that background. Like, what was, before we get into this, what was, 'cause I think it's good background and context, what was it like at Netflix to kind of try to have, like, really and hold and keep and inspire really top talent, and what did they do that was really different? I'd love to hear from you, as I'm sure everyone would.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is that it's absolutely core to the culture. It is ingrained in the culture that the organization is ran like an elite sports team, and there are, you know, a place on the team is a real privilege, and that only the best performers get a spot on the team and get to keep a spot on the team. And so that is part of the culture. It's written in their culture document. It's written, it's really accountability for that is by all the leaders, starting right from the CEO, Reed Hastings. And so I think that sets the stage for, certainly from talent practitioners or other kind of CHROs, that sets the stage for making it easier to have high talent density and to really only keep the best performers.
That's a really interesting metaphor of like a elite sports team, right? You imagine an elite sports team that, you know, you don't get on as a, you know, an okay player or a good player or even a great player. You actually get on because you're an exceptional player and you're absolutely, you know, way ahead of others. How did Netflix kind of make that happen? What were some of the things that they did differently to make that happen?
So I think one of the things is only keeping people. So there's a high barrier to entry, right. But then there's also, you know, you only get to stay on the Olympic team if you are at an Olympic level. And so I think communication from the off that, hey, this might not be permanent. This isn't a, you know, you don't get a place on the team for life. So being really clear with that, then there's a test, and anyone who's read the No Rules Rules book by Reed Hastings will know this. There's a test called the Keeper Test. And so all managers are asked to apply the Keeper Test on an ongoing basis, which is asking yourself, would I fight to keep this person should they resign? You know, would I be offering them more money? Would I be offering them a bigger role? Would I be asking them to stay? And if the answer is no, then you should be upgrading, because everybody on your team you should absolutely want to keep on your team. And, you know, we've all had those employees that have come to us and have said, you know, I've got another opportunity, and secretly you're maybe pleased and it's not such a bad thing, and, you know, they were okay, but it's really this notion that okay is not okay. Right. And so that's a key test. And here at 10x Genomics, we've just started thinking about applying that through some of our systems and processes.
Yeah, it's a really kind of challenging concept. It challenges a lot of conventions. And we met up a couple of months ago in Silicon Valley. You came to one of our dinners there. And we started talking. We were sitting outside talking about this issue. And it's I was so fascinated with this concept of can you kind of have a company of just, you know, the top elite performers? Is that even a good idea? And is it possible? And how would you do it? And so we ended up here having the conversation. I said, hey, this is a great conversation. I bet others would be interested in it. So that's what we're doing here, folks, is that we're continuing that conversation. And I don't have all the answers yet. And Bex is in the middle of many experiments. But I thought it would be so fascinating to ask that question, is sort of, is it possible to have a company of just, you know, top performers, like elite athletes? And I guess first of all, like, how do you think about like top performers? Is it a universal thing? Is it across all companies, or how do you think about top performers? And is that different to high potentials?
Yeah, I think it's really different to high potentials. So I think top performers and this concept of talent density is really where you have everybody who in every role across the organization is exceptional at what they do. Now, whereas, you know, I guess there's a precursor to the more traditional version of kind of high potentials, is that performance is a necessary but insufficient criteria to be a high potential. Whereas, you know, you could have somebody, like, think of a really exceptional teacher, right? I'm sure we've all had exceptional teachers in our lives, or maybe in our children's lives, and they maybe don't have leadership skills, or they're not really great at admin. And so they're not going to go on and become a deputy head or a head teacher, but they're a really, really exceptional teacher. And right. So I believe that the benefit that you get from having somebody who's really exceptional, and not necessarily high potential, but really exceptional in that role, applies to every role. And I don't think it, you know, I think some people would say, counter argument is potentially, well, there are some roles where it doesn't matter, and just having somebody that's okay is okay. Whereas my view is that no, you get much more out of the organization if everybody is really exceptional at what they do, even if it's the cleaner. And the cleaner, you get much more out of somebody who's just doing an okay job than somebody who's doing a really exceptional job. And I think the benefits that you get from that are that you need less bureaucracy around the organization. You need less process. You can move quicker. You've got people who go above and beyond. And if you've got that in every role, that there's an outsized results from that there's a sort of a multiplier effect.
Yeah, let's dig into that a bit. I guess like people are exceptional at their role, right? There's probably there's probably some common principles, but it sort of depends. Like you think about, a utility, right? Who's keeping houses connected to the power, generating electricity, whatever they do. Like, top talent in that place might be, really, really smart at engineering, like an excellent engineer, and good with people, but they're fundamentally, exceptional engineer. Whereas at Netflix, it's an exceptional, creative person, perhaps in the writing stage, right? So I think they probably have some similar skills as being sort of that elite performer, which is probably around adapting. But if I'd have to say, if I sort of thought about, like, they've got a really strong growth mindset, that they, throw anything at them, they learn it fast and they adapt quickly. So I think adapting quickly is key. There's a baseline of intelligence that's there, but it's got to be more than that. I think they've got the strong IQ and the strong people skills. So it's sort of, I think those are probably the three critical foundations: kind of this growth mindset, people skills, and intellectual skills. What would you comment on that?
Yeah, so look, at 10x Genomics, we have a wide range of roles, and there are three core characteristics. So as we've looked at kind of capability frameworks, we're really looked on what's the essential rather than the exhaustive. And the three characteristics that are common across all roles are intellectual horsepower, so being really, really smart, collaboration, so being able to collaborate with people, and we can talk a little bit more about why in a high talent density organization I think collaboration is absolutely critical. And then drive and passion, a real want to make a difference, to do good work. And I think for us, the other thing that harnesses that and makes some of this sort of high talent density easier is that drive and passion, and being a mission-driven organization. So everybody is driven around one goal of mastering biology to advance human health. Everybody wants to make a difference in the world. And so I do think it maybe differs per organization, but for us, that those three things were absolutely critical.
Right. Yeah, I think there's an element of intrinsic motivation for the industry itself, right? Like if you're in the public sector, you should be deeply intrinsically motivated by, civic.
Yeah. Oh, I think we've lost David for a second there. How do we gauge intellectual horsepower? I'll go to some of the questions until David comes back to us. But how do you gauge intellectual horsepower? So really what we're looking there is ability to analyze and synthesize information. And that may look different across different roles, but is somebody able to take in a broad range of information, analyze that data, make a plan, and see that plan through to action? And that's really what we're looking at. Amazing. And so we're not measuring it by kind of more traditional sort of IQ measures or anything like that. Hey, David.
Hey, sorry, I'm having some Wi-Fi challenges where I am today. Hopefully that's one of one. We'll see. We're saying, I think, like, there's this intrinsic passion people should have for the industry, and if that's, public sector is one thing. If it's, if it's media, it's another thing. If it's our industry, it's another thing. So you should have people that are deeply intrinsically motivated by the work. That's something we think about. And then really, strong IQ, but also strong social skills. And then I think maybe the fourth one is that adaptability, resourcefulness, growth mindset, I think is really key as well. So there's probably four things. I'd love there to be three, but there's probably four things. So let's get into this central question. This is great backdrop, but let's get into this central question of, is it important for every company to have like is it something every company should aspire to have only the very best possible people in each role, or is it okay in lots of companies that there are lots of okay people? What's your perspective on that? Let's go right to the most controversial.
Okay, so my perspective is, look, everybody should want to have the best of the best. And I think most companies, their purpose is to run a successful company, and that largely, especially in the current environment, means revenue, profit, cash flow positive, all of those kind of successful measures, great share prices for those companies that are public, and so on. And so to be the best companies, I think you need the best people. And I think there is a bigger return that you get on bigger people, on better people. And so I would argue that every company should be aiming to do this. And, who wants to be kind of surrounded by average people? And I think there's a couple of reasons why it's important, because one, I think it makes your company much more effective. You have much more impact. I also think that your employee engagement goes up. Great people want to work with other great people. And, the average performers, and most organizations are pretty good at getting rid of the underperformers. But if you think about a normal distribution curve, most companies, just by the function of their compensation program, normally expect to have a few top performers, expect to have a few underperformers, and everybody else is in the middle. We only want that right-hand side. And I think, if you have that right-hand side and you're aiming for that, those top performers get really dragged down by the average. When everybody's really passionate and those people aren't as passionate, or if people are really collaborative and they come across people that are really difficult to work with, it's really draining. And so you have a double negative by tolerating the average. Not only are they not as good as the top performers at whatever their craft is and whatever their job is, but they're also quite having a negative impact on those others around you, and almost resetting what the norm is and dragging those top performers down. Yeah. I know there was a question about sort of potential, but I think traditionally we've almost boxed ourselves in with like high potential models. So your 9-box grid tells you that, hey, you can only have whatever it is, 5 or 10% of people who are high performance or high potential. But who wants to work in an organization where only 5 or 10% of the people are really passionate and really collaborative and really interesting and intellectual and really adaptive? I just think that actually that's a sort of a more traditional way to look at it, and that we can actually work in a world where everybody can be really impactful.
Right. There's a lot of interesting comments coming up. We'll dig into some of them. I just want to unpack a couple of things that you've said. The classic sort of concept of high potential is sort of like, someone who can rise through the organization. So, ready now for another, promotion, and quickly will be ready for the next promotion, and could run that function or be a really senior. So high potential is a lot about kind of that ambition to really grow in the organization, high potential, whereas a high performer might be really happy staying in the role they're in for years and years. Yeah. They're not sort of jostling to get promoted all the time necessarily. They're just really good at what they do. It's this difference about really good at what you do versus super ambitious to rise in the organization. And I think we're not trying to say, or you're not trying to say, like, have a company where everyone's trying to be the CEO. No. That's probably not ideal. It's like have a company where everyone's exceptional at what they do, like the elite performer. Yeah. The elite athlete,
Absolutely. And some of those people may go on and do something bigger. I also think that, that's one of the problems with potential. It's actually really difficult to predict potential, and it's sort of potential for what? And just because somebody wants to be promoted and wants to be the next CEO doesn't mean to say that they have the skill set or capability to do it. And so I think, even reading, like, foreseeing who's going to rise through the organization is actually very difficult, because it's a super complex thing. And, people change organizations. I know people who've been very successful at one organization, moved and not been anywhere near successful at another, and vice versa. I think there's also context within that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I know that the research that if you're a top performer in one company as a leader and you move to another company, it takes years to get back to the same level of performance, unless you bring your team. If you bring a team with you, you hit the ground running. It shows you how much it's about, it's about your team. I want to address one of the comments, and this is sort of something I was mulling on as we spoke earlier, that we're not trying to say we should advocate for a fixed mindset and just, test, and only hire people who we absolutely know are amazing, because this whole idea can be approached with a growth mindset, right? You can hire someone who's been exceptional at a completely different job, right, and hire them into a different role and know that they're going to have to learn a lot. So they don't have to be absolutely proven to be exceptional. You're just looking for that raw thing of like high intellect, high social skills, drive and passion, and maybe that growth mindset. So we're not trying to say you have to be an elite athlete before you get here. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, and look, I think also remember, like, there's an elite athlete at different stages, right? So, like, yes, if I was hiring a new chief marketing officer, I would probably want them to have been proven to come in and lead that part of the organization. But I'm also hiring research assistants who have maybe never worked in a commercial organization or working in a lab in academia, or have never done this before, but absolutely show the raw material. So there's a whole range of roles. And so I think there's a degree to which you are looking at that, but the expectation is that they would come in and perform. Right. So I think it's different by different levels.
Yeah. And let's address this question. I was wondering about this earlier as well. Like, let's assume this matters in all companies to some degree, but it might matter in some companies more than others, right? Like, if you are going back to, say, a utility, does it matter that absolutely everyone is absolutely exceptional? Maybe it helps, but it doesn't matter as much as if you're a biotech.
Or a software developer, right? So yeah, I think there's both roles and companies. So there's, if you look at software roles, there's a lot of research that shows that, a software developer who's exceptional versus one that's average can produce something like 20 times more code that's 20 times more creative. Like, the difference between the rock star coder and the average coder has been proven time and time again to have real impact. So I think there's also roles as well that it might be different. Right.
That reminds me of some research earlier about that what the top performing companies do. It's not that they necessarily have absolutely everyone amazing, it's where they put them. So maybe this is also about, if you're an accounting firm, then having rockstar accountants really matters. But if you're a recruiting company, you don't need rockstar accountants, you need rockstar recruiters, right? Yeah. And so maybe it's also about picking the function in the business where you have to have teams that are all super high performance. That might be a way to understand this. So it matters differently depending on different types of companies, and then also probably matters variably in the different functions in those companies. So it's not a universally, hey, every company should fire everyone who's only average right now. That's not necessarily what we're suggesting. It's a little bit more nuanced than that.
Yeah, and I think, and that's it. Like, everything everybody does within their organization is you have to work within the culture of the organization and the impact you want your organization to have. So taking these concepts and saying what would work for me is really critical.
Yeah, I think about the standards question and like, just even defining top performance is such an interesting and kind of controversial topic, right? To me, I think the way to understand this, because it's quite role specific as well, right? Is the study of what's called positive deviance. And positive deviance or positive deviancy is the study of the people who are just the outliers in a particular role, right? So you've got a bunch of, business development people, sort of junior folks, maybe fresh out of college, and just somehow there'll be one of them that just makes so many more meetings than anyone else. And so it's like studying, like, what does that person do? And how do they do it? And then how do we replicate that across the business? And so I think positive deviance is a really interesting way to look at this, is sort of studying the people who do not a little bit better than everyone, but a lot better than everyone. And looking at kind of how to replicate that across the teams and kind of set those standards. We've been trying to do that with what we call talent champions internally at NLI. Sort of have someone at each particular role that's replicated, have them identify what great looks like, and then, mentor and develop the others, along the way.
Yeah.
And I think this is what I heard from you at Netflix, is that it's not about, making recruiting so tough that you only hire people who you're absolutely sure are rock stars. You're still giving people a chance. So you are recruiting pretty toughly, but then it's more about kind of taking people out, and doing that humanely as well. Can you talk a little bit about that? It's obviously a really difficult conversation, but sort of how do you take people out more humanely? What does that look like?
Yeah, look, so I think you're absolutely right. There's a number of different systems. Yes, your hiring is one aspect, but and holding out for the right hire and keeping that hiring bar high. But then calling it when it hasn't happened, right? So, and sometimes that's quickly. We've all made hires where we thought somebody did great in our recruitment process, they didn't turn out, and you recognize that within the first 3 months or so. It might be further down the line. And so I think in terms of kind of humanely, one key thing is constantly giving people feedback. So knowing where they stand. And so if you apply the Keeper test, yes, there's the people that fail it, but most of the time people will pass it. And so if somebody passes your Keeper's test, making sure you lean into recognition, praise, feedback, and that somebody understands where they sit. And then if they don't pass, that you're constantly giving them feedback, you're giving them the opportunity to grow, to develop, to improve. And if they aren't able to course correct, then you move them out of the organization. So it doesn't come as a surprise. I think there's also kind of other systems, so things like the severance package. So a generous severance package here at 10X, we just revised our severance packages so that if we do exit people, that we are giving them a more generous severance package. That's something that Netflix does and has done for many, many years. And so I also think, having business partners, HR business partners that are real coaches. And so we have business partners who coach the leaders, coach our employees, and making sure that you lean into management development. I mean, we've leveraged the SCARF model. We've leveraged you guys right throughout our management development training, making sure that every people manager in the organization knows how to give feedback. I mean, they are the talent custodians of the organization, and it really is their job to make sure that we are treating our employees with dignity and respect. And so in a high collaboration environment, that means, yes, you give feedback, but you always do it in a way that's respectful. And so we found that leveraging the SCARF model is really important, where we can have, edgy conversations that are sometimes difficult, but people walk away from that feeling respected.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. So it's kind of hire well with very high standards, right? So hire well with really high standards. Have real clarity about what great looks like, tons and tons of feedback. So you're giving people plenty of opportunities to get to that great. You're right. You're not saying, well, you're not great in your first month or first 3 months, you're out. You're giving people tons of feedback to get to that place of great. Yeah. And believing in them, having a growth mindset. And then, if you find at some point that they're not suited, then you exit really caringly. You exit them really thoughtfully and caringly, and take care of them on the exit. I mean, that sounds like quite a humane. Can I ask the question everyone's probably wondering? What's that timeline? Is it a month? Is it 3 months? Is it 6, 12, 24? Like, at what point do you exit?
Look, it depends on the geography. So certainly in the US, it would probably be, a couple of months, right? Like if I've been giving you feedback for a couple of months and your performance isn't improving, then, and you're unable to course correct, we would move to exit.
Right.
I'm conscious there are lots of comments in the chat, and I'm unable to multitask. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I've got them.
Are you okay? You're reading them. Okay, good.
Yeah, definitely. There's some great ones. And there's a lot of good comments. I mean, someone's asking some specifics on exit packages. When you say generous, like I remember there was a lot of stories about Netflix practically paying people to leave, really generously. What's the philosophy you've pulled through at 10X Genomics? Yeah,
so we've moved to kind of a level base rather than a tenure base. So we used to be tenure, so depending on your length of service. We've grown a lot over the last few years, so that was it felt unfair to some of our newer employees, and if people got here and it quickly wasn't the right move for them, and so we moved to a different level, and so we offer anywhere between kind of 2 months and 6 months salary.
Yeah,
Depending on
that's
depending
pretty
on
generous.
the level. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty generous. That's good to know. Yeah, lots of things, lots of questions coming up. Before we dig into them, I wanted to ask you a couple more questions, because I think I'm getting a feel for sort of how this can look, right? How this can work.
Mhm.
But I wanted to just challenge, both of us a little bit, because there's the super chicken concept, right? I don't know if some of you may have heard of this, but the super chicken concept was a story from, in fact, Margaret Heffernan. Someone just put it in the chat right now. Look at that jinx timing. That I must have been reading everyone's mind. The super chicken concept was that if you have too many, top people in one team, they basically just argue, and that it was based on this research they did, that when you have kind of alpha chickens all in the same coop, they kind of peck each other to death. So can you speak to that? Like, is that a concern, or what have you seen, or how do you sort of offset that effect?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and so I think that one of the potential like dark sides of this is either you hire all of these highly competitive people and they just compete against each other, which is the super chickens, and they end up pecking each other to death. Or that there's a fear culture, so that everybody's petrified. If I'm not good enough, I'm not going to keep, I'm not going to keep my job. And I think the antidote to that is that notion of collaboration. So working in an environment where you're screening for humility, for ability to collaborate, that you're actively taking out people that don't collaborate, even if they're absolutely brilliant, right? We've all worked with people who are technically exceptional, but are just really unpleasant to work with, and not tolerating those kinds of people. And so this high collaboration means that actually what you end up with is great minds wanting to do great things. And it's this sort of positive reinforcing cycle rather than pecking each other to death. I also think that, that point I made about the feedback and giving positive feedback and praise and recognition, so that those people that are the keepers and the ones that you want to stay know where they stand. And so they know that they're doing a great job. They're not operating from a position of fear, that they continue to innovate and make great ideas. And I also think the growth mindset, I know that there was a comment about the growth mindset. So we do growth mindset training as part of our onboarding, and it's a really critical part of being part of the organization. And to your point about that ability to adapt, I think that is also a huge, huge part of this.
Yeah, I know. Interesting. To Jane's comment, and a few people's like, if you're cringing hearing this conversation, that's a good sign, because I was cringing hearing this conversation the first time as well, which made me want to have it more. I'm one of those strange people that if something looks really uncomfortable, I want to steer into it because there's something there. And it is a challenging conversation. I opened with saying it's kind of a controversial thing, but there's something here for us all to unpack and learn from, I think. So it's a really interesting question. So the way I think about the super chicken thing is, if people are battling for status, right, they will fight. So there's a terrible tragedy unfolding in Africa at the moment, and it's because someone put two warlords on equal footing in this country, and of course they fought for status, right? And the battle for status it can be very violent. Now, the way you offset status is with relatedness, which is shared goals. So you have to have this really strong sense of collaboration and shared goal, so that people, feel like they're on the same team. They're not battling to be the top of the team. So I think, it could be easy to have an organization of top performers where people really did fight each other.
Yeah.
It is possible that you could have the super chicken concept there.
Absolutely.
If performance management was set up incorrectly, for example, you might have like Microsoft's lost decade, where top people did fight each other for the top roles and the top bonuses. We helped them change that. So I think, depending on the systems like performance management, remuneration, other things, you could end up with super chicken. You need systems that support collaboration. You want to speak to that, Bex?
Yeah, absolutely. So we don't have traditional performance management. We have ongoing performance management where it is about continuous feedback. And we have some forcing functions throughout that. We do, talent reviews at a leadership level to help leaders understand the leaders in their team. We have biannual conversations, which are forcing functions for managers to dive deeper into what's working well, what's not working well, and opportunities for growth. We don't limit the number of promotions. So we promote currently about 25% of our employees every year. We look to pay at the top of market, and we don't, sometimes this is, sometimes these models are limited by affordability. And so, if you've got a normal distribution of talent, you can have a normal distribution of compensation where you can pay, your best performers the best and everybody else average. We don't look to do that. And so, again, we've leaned into hiring our managers so that they're skilled in giving that feedback and doing that in a way that sort of maintains dignity and respect. Exactly the reason to prevent the super chicking or a fear culture mentality. And I was really fortunate a couple of years ago to work with Margaret Heffernan and had her come to the organization I was with to talk. I mean, Willful Blindness is one of my absolute favorite books. If anybody hasn't read it, read it immediately. It will change your life. And so, really don't want that to happen. And I think you see that in a number of organizations that are just ruthless, or even in sports teams, you can see it where, rather than working together, people are competing against each other. And I think some of that is about scarcity of resources. And so we don't operate in this scarcity of resource. We don't operate where only 10% of our people can be high potential, or only 10% of our people can get the best bonuses and things. If you perform, you will get paid, and there's no limits or forced distribution on that.
Right. That's really important. I think that's important. A couple of tactical things. What was the name of the book again that you just mentioned from Margaret?
Willful Blindness. She's also written another one on collaboration, which is also, again, why I'm a huge fan of the importance of collaboration. But Willful Blindness, I think, was one of her first books, and it's great.
Yeah, no, it's a great book. There's a lot of interesting books around kind of how we get things wrong, and there's a book called Being Wrong. It's fascinating. All sorts of stuff in that area. But Margaret's really interesting thinker. Quite a few people asking about growth mindset, sort of tactically how you're doing that, how you think about it, how you're onboarding people with it. Just give us a little dive into that.
Yeah, so we worked with your team, who were a fabulous partner originally to roll this out. We brought David in to speak to the organization about the importance of a growth mindset, and then we rolled out the training across the organization. We did some of that virtually. We did some of it face to face. We then now have growth mindset, and there's sort of three sessions, and you watch the videos and do the worksheets, and then have a seminar at the end that we include as part of our onboarding training. And so at onboarding, you're asked to register for that. It's not mandated. I've not got a consequence if you don't go through it, but it's highly encouraged. It's also written in our culture document. So one of the things that the CEO and I did a couple of years ago was really clearly articulate what our culture is at 10X. And some of this stuff is in there about being, talent dense and a high performing organization. A key principle is that we believe that there are outsized results from exceptional talent. And as part of that, we expect our talent to have this growth mindset, to seek feedback, to, learn, adapt from mistakes, to make mistakes.
Right.
And so being really clear that is part of our expectations.
Yeah, no, that's great. Growth mindset is such a foundational thing. Like when you prime people for a growth mindset, they're so much more receptive to feedback. They actually benefit from positive role models. They benefit from mentoring, from training, all of that, so much more. And a couple of people are just sort of asking to know more. We have a solution called Grow that activates the growth mindset in basically over a month. So you can kind of learn it and apply it. And if you're interested in information, just put the word grow in the chat. Someone will follow up and send you some links and resources on our Grow solution. And that's sort of, you can work in just about every platform possible. Thanks for that. I actually, a little embarrassing because I forgot we'd actually done the Grow work with you. I knew we'd done other work, so I wasn't trying to do a commercial there, but it ended up that way. Growth mindset's a fantastic foundation for this, and also feedback, like really teaching people, feedback. And I think that, the research we did on that is creating a culture of asking for feedback is so important. It halves how stressful it is for both sides. And then, the other way to think about growth mindset is it's something you make as a priority. You need to build the habits, but then it also needs to go into your systems. And it sounds like you've been thinking about that. You can have performance management systems that fight growth mindset and encourage a fixed mindset. You can have talent systems, promotion systems that go for or against growth mindset. So that's really important. And I think that's where Microsoft got things wrong. They accidentally primed people for a fixed mindset and to compete, and they ended up losing a lot of amazing talent.
Yeah, and I think also I mean, it's interesting you talk about the feedback. We've also just rolled out feedback training across the organization. We started virtually and now we've moved to doing that face-to-face as we've much more in the office, but that it's such an important skill, and I think it's incredibly overlooked. It's incredibly difficult to ask for feedback and to give feedback, and so I think helping people develop that skill is really critical.
Yeah, we saw some interesting things in the data. We did an actual live test with real humans in a company, and we found that the giving feedback is actually just as stressful as receiving it. Both of them raise your heart rate to the level of having just gone for a run, but the giving was as stressful or more in every situation than receiving it, which was really interesting. We didn't expect that. But when a person asks for feedback first, it halves the stress, roughly halves the stress for both sides. And the reason that's important is that stress level actually reduces the capacity you need for the difficult task of processing, feedback, which, it's very, very difficult. I wish I could give my cat feedback right now. It's insisting on saying hello to everyone, but you want to say hello and then you can go away. There you go. It's one of those moments. Fantastic. So lots of great questions coming in. Thanks everyone. Keep them coming in. Let's dig into some of the other questions. I'm just spotting those as well. What do you guys do differently around recruiting? Tell us about some of the things that you do in terms of sort of making the bar sort of higher. What are some of the strategies you've learned from Netflix and all your roles to really get that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly, we have a phenomenal recruitment team, right? So I think, great recruiters attract and hire great people. So and so they do a lot of this hard work. But one of the processes that we put in place here at 10X is that every candidate does a presentation. And so we do a screening, they do a screening with the hiring manager, the recruiter, then the hiring manager, and then we bring them in to do a presentation. And so in that presentation, people are asked to walk through their background, say a little bit about themselves, their values. In some instances, we ask them more kind of case study type questions relevant to the role. And what that does is two things. It means that the interviews that we have with the panel are not you don't spend the first 20 minutes going through everybody's CV because they've already talked through that in a forum. It also it really allows people to kind of show up. And it's really interesting how you can have great conversations one-on-one, but then when they get into a room and have to present to an audience, are actually not so
right.
skilled, or the analytics that they put into the question that we've talked about, you get an insight into how they think, how they analyze data and so on. Which is really important for pretty much every role that we have at the organization. And in a high collaborative environment, how you operate in that team environment is really important. So that's something that we've put in place that I found being really helpful to screen for candidates.
Right. That, even more important if you're hiring a manager, like a people manager in any way, because they've got to interact with people. And I've seen it go both ways. There's a scientist I know is one of the most brilliant scientists around. He actually is the founding father of emotional regulation research, and James Gross, his name. We've had him at the summit a few times. One-to-one, he's super quiet, super like thoughtful, almost like you got to pulling teeth sometimes as you ask him a question. He'll like sit and think for 30 seconds, and it's like really, really quiet. And then I saw him on stage for the first time. We sort of took a punt because he's so thoughtful, and he became a completely different person when there was an audience of any size. And he was phenomenal on stage in a group. So I think, and then I've seen it the other way. I've seen some people who really, interview amazingly one-to-one, and then in a group just kind of fall apart. So I think that's important. A diverse team. I mean, I'll share some of the learnings we've had. Obviously, having a diverse panel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doing that interview. But we did several senior hires recently, and we used the opportunity. I stepped back into NLI full-time about a year ago. I was kind of more CEO part-time, but I stepped back in, and one of the things I did was I changed our hiring process to really, really make sure we were hiring the best possible people. not the people who interviewed the best.
Yeah.
And we changed our process a lot and started doing the same thing, a panel interview. And it was really fascinating. Both times I hired differently than if I'd gone on the interview.
Mhm.
So when I interviewed one-on-one, like I picked someone who just felt right and, you know, really like presented well. And then when we got a team there, they actually saw things I didn't see. And we were really able to isolate the person's actual skill set at the specific job much, much more. And so I guess that meant I, you know, reduced my biases, my similarity bias, and probably my experience bias. But really, really powerful thing to hire with a panel and have a process, especially if that panel, you know, really, really thinks differently. But I think even more so, if you can go into that, defining what great performance looks like in that conversation.
Yeah, and just on that point, somebody's kind of put in the chat about sort of managing diversity and inclusion, and certainly, you know, we purposefully, and we state it explicitly again in our culture doc, that, you know, if we want to be the best company on the world, we need to have the best talent in the world, which comes from a number of different places. And just because somebody went to a great school or a top school does not necessarily mean that they are actually really exceptional. And so we don't say, like, there are not particular schools that we look to hire for or hire from, especially here in the US, where there's huge amounts of bias as to kind of how you get into those schools. And so, yeah, that's not something that we look at. You know, we try and look at diverse sourcing. So one of the things that we've had a lot of success in is having our sources spend the first, 4 hours or 8 hours of a search looking for only diverse candidates, right? And what diverse means will be different in different situations, because we talk about additive. And so, you know, my team is largely women. And so additive in my team would be a man. And so what diverse means in different teams looks for different things, but the team will go through and look for more diverse candidates, knowing that, you know, if we really want to continue to innovate, we need that cognitive diversity.
Yeah.
And then from an inclusion perspective, really focusing on collaboration, focusing on treating each other with dignity and respect, even in difficult conversations, leads to this sense of belonging. And so we find that 94% of our employees tell us that they feel like they belong at 10X. And so, you know, really, really high, but I attribute that to this collaborative environment where you get to work with amazing colleagues and you get feedback from these amazing colleagues. Right.
You know, the thing that really strikes me about all of this is sort of, and I know there's a lot of controversy and you've got to do this thoughtfully and systematically, but, you know, smart people really love to work with other smart people.
Yeah.
And maybe you don't need to apply this to your whole organization, right? But again, if you're a recruiting company, you need amazing recruiters. You need to make sure that they're amazing, right? Maybe your finance people don't have to be totally amazing. They have to be, you know, really good performers. So it might not be the whole company. Maybe there are some companies, like say a research company, where you want the whole company to be absolute high performers. So I think that's there, but it's really hard to get past the fact that, you know, really, really smart people want to work with really, really smart other people that lift them, but don't like equal them, or they're not annoying, but, you know, literally lift them. And I think that creates a virtuous cycle of attracting more and more top talent. And so it's a really interesting question. Yeah, no, I do want to comment on one thing that you do have to be careful with a team presentation that you're not hiring the extroverts. In fact, we actually hired a quieter person in one of those things. So we hired 2 people, and one of them we actually hired the much more quiet, thoughtful person as a result of the team. And we were going to hire the extrovert before the team interview. So you want to be thoughtful that you're not.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I think that also kind of depends on I often think that organizations have personalities. And so I think it's the personality of the organization. And I remember when I got to Netflix, I was like, whoa, everyone's a really huge extrovert. And I'm not. I'm sort of in the middle, and I can perhaps flex either way, but there were very extreme extroversion there. At 10X, I actually think we're probably more of an introverted company.
Right.
And, you know, and so if I look at many of the senior leaders, I think that they're introverted. So I think you've got to also look at kind of where is the bias of the organization, and the organization will bias to its personality, right?
Right.
And so which is not always extrovert.
Yeah, and it's so important, going to Jenny and Jonathan's comments. It's so important that you're clear on what great performance looks like, not what great personalities look like.
Yes, absolutely.
And that you're clear about this is what great outcomes look like, right?
Yeah.
In this role, and you're taking it away from personality.
Yeah, and look, that was why I always had a problem with this kind of like high potential concept, because I think actually what you find when you look at high potentials is you're looking at their personality, and it's not actually a measure of personality, a measure of potential. It's a measure of how much do I like you.
Right.
And yes, you're great at your job, but I like you so much, I think you could do more wonderful things in the future, with very little objectivity around it.
So I'm hearing 4 things, like real clarity at an organizational level about what great looks like in each role, and a passion for hiring, really, really great people. A higher bar for recruiting. Deep growth mindset. So it's going to be more than 4 things now, but a deep growth mindset. So you are actually developing people. You're not just cutting them off, right? Tons and tons of feedback as part of that. And then exit, lovingly, caringly, thoughtfully when you have to do that, and relatively quickly.
Yeah.
It's an interesting approach. I mean, I think there's a lot to learn from that for companies, and maybe not the whole company, but teams. I think it's an interesting perspective. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that there's a huge part of leadership accountability. Like, leaders have to be accountable for the talent bar. And so making sure that they realize that this is their responsibility, and to their benefit as well, because these are difficult things. I mean, managing this and getting lots of feedback around the organization is huge. It's really difficult. Exiting people that are underperforming or even just average performing is really challenging, because for the most part they're probably really decent human beings, and taking away their livelihood, especially in the current climate, can be a really taxing decision. So making sure that leaders are ready to do this is really important, and you've got the right leaders in place, and so starting at the top is important.
Absolutely. The question that everyone just wants to talk about these days, it seems to be the only thing anyone's talking about, your perspective on AI and your role, driving the talent of an organization. Any comments on kind of, are you optimistic, pessimistic, and how do you think it's going to impact?
I'm super optimistic. I think it's another kind of step leap forward. I don't think it's going to lead to extinction, which is kind of like one of the current theories. And I was actually at Palantir yesterday, an AI conference. And look, I think the implications for HR are still to be kind of fully demonstrated. I think there's huge implications for logistics and supply chain management. I think there's huge implications for, if you work at a big hospital and you're managing staffing and you've got to staff, plan for 6,000 beds and 3,000 nurses and get everybody to everywhere, that probably was hours and hours of man time before is now about 15 minutes using AI. I think that there'll be some great things of, if you're in a bigger company and all the data you can pull together to say, who is ready for their next role, who should we be tapping for a promotion, who should we be thinking about for, a new role across the organization, who maybe is a flight risk, in a much more data-driven role, rather than back to this, oh, I'm going to tap you on the shoulder, David, because I've known you for a long time and I really like you. And so I think, but I think that there's tons of prospects. I think it's going to be great. I think it will be ingrained in our education systems. I think, writing essays is gone. ChatGPT can do it better than we can, but can you argue with ChatGPT? So I think as we look at kind of like assessments in schools and exams, I think that ChatGPT will be a fun thing to make sure that the kids can try and outsmart.
Right. Yeah. No, it's going to be fascinating. Absolutely. I think it will power up a lot of organizations to do a lot more. It'd be interesting to see the effect on the workforce as a whole. But I think there'll be a net positive on the whole, with some people left behind for sure. and a lot of people benefiting as well. I mean, I think, you know, the two things jumping out for me as you think about this kind of strategy, you know, if you took a role, you know, if you left 10x Genomics and went to another company, you would do this again, I'm sure. And you know, it's a strategy for, you know, accelerating talent, accelerating performance. I think the two things to really you know, be mindful of is making sure you're really putting a growth mindset underneath this, which you're doing really well. And secondly, that you're really mitigating the biases. I know you're thoughtful about. Those are the two things I think are really, really important. I think that's very doable. You've got me thinking a lot about how to do this right. And, you know, in an era when companies are saying, well, we've got to cut costs, so let's just take 10% out. Like, this might be a different way of thinking about that.
Absolutely. Like I do think I think you can do more with less. I think with fewer, better people, you can have an organization that is more effective and works better together and has greater impact.
Right. But if you do it in a way where people are still competing, it might go horribly wrong.
Yeah,
right?
completely.
You've got to do it in a way where there's real collaboration, change your reward systems, recognition systems. So you can do more with less. And maybe it's you know, you're not taking 10% out. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less, but it's about raising the bar. And you know, humanely exiting people when that has to happen after a lot of feedback and a lot of opportunity. So, you know, some really deep thoughts, folks. Just before you jump off, my team's going to put a poll up just so we know how to follow up with you, how to support you, whether it's around you know, any of these things. If you are interested in the work that we do on bias, just put the word bias in the chat. We'll follow up with some of our resources on our Decide solution and how we think about that. That's come up a few times. So just before you jump off, if you can fill in the poll. And just before we wrap up, we'll wrap up in about 30 seconds, but any closing thoughts, Bex, for, you know, we've got a couple hundred, you know, HR leaders and talent executives listening to us. Any sort of words of wisdom or kindness of support for people wanting to explore this?
Well, I want to thank you all for listening and for all of the comments. I've been trying to sort of read them, but really, really interesting. I love all the comments about bias and how that's important, and making sure that, you know, we both look at structures, but also look at training to make sure that we mitigate that within that plagues all of our people systems, not just how we hire and exit and manage talent density. But I appreciate you all listening today and wish you all the well. It's Friday, so have a great weekend.
Fantastic. Summer Fridays started for us at NLI finally. So
everyone's
very excited. Great to have you with us, Bex. Jump off here if you'd like. We're going to do a quick announcement. So I'm going to hand back to Shelby. Thanks so much for joining us, and hope to see you at the summit in October.
Yeah, great.
Be back to continue this conversation. Thanks so
See
much.
you soon. Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful.
Thanks so
wonderful.
much.
Thank you.
I'll jump off as well. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Shelby. Back to you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you both for today's discussion. As David mentioned, please take a look and let us know how NLI can help you with that poll. We just want to thank you for attending today. As always, staying engaged and sharing your thoughts and questions with us. We can't have these conversations without you. We'd also love to hear your feedback. So if you're interested in sharing topics for the future, let us know. We'll drop a link to share that. And Insider Exchange, specifically for our senior executives, if you enjoy your Brain at Work Live, we think you'll really enjoy this. It's an opportunity to have roundtable discussions with our leaders internally to help us with research and new innovations. So if you're interested, check out the link in the chat. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, you can listen to the podcast as well. So check out your Brain at Work wherever you listen to your podcast, and there will be new episodes. And this is where we officially say farewell. So on behalf of our team behind the scenes and everyone here today, thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you when we return here next week. Have a great weekend.